and you're just spending time with each other. There's nothing pulling on you. Everyone's at home together. And here you can't even enjoy that part, which from my perspective would be very rewarding for a harmony user, extroverted feeling driver.
Yeah. I think that's the symptom, is realizing there's something wrong with me.
I'm not saying that,
but that's the thing, is like, I
have your preferences, whatever.
I mean, there is a beauty in saying I should be better at this by now. I should be and I think like sometimes we push away that voice because we think it sounds critical, but really it's a quest giver.
Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week we have a special guest back with us again in the studio. Jonathan Hardin is with us this week. Jonathan, welcome.
Hello, hello.
If you remember, Jonathan was on the show probably about a year ago. Jonathan, you talked about, when you came on, it was a very poignant episode, I think, from my perspective. We talked about the art of dying well. You have years of hospice nurse experience. We talked about what the end of life looks like. We talked a little bit about personality types and personal growth in that, but really tuned into a person's experience at the end of their life. And I think it was a wonderful conversation. If you haven't heard that episode, you're listening or watching right now, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. Like, Jonathan's got it's a cool episode. He's got a lot of good things to say, and I think you'd really benefit from it. But we're not here to talk about that this week.
Something a little different.
That's right. So a couple episodes ago, myself and Antonia made a good attempt to talk about a framework that you and I were talking about, Jonathan. You listened to it. We even mentioned you on the show.
I think you did a great job.
Way to get Jonathan for the details.
No, in the podcast, y'all did mention a little bit, like, we're probably butchering this, but I think you did a great job with the framework. But I liked that podcast. I love talking about the framework of 4 ways to diagnose your problems using gameplay theory and story beats. So yeah, I'm excited about talking about it today.
Awesome. So you'll correct all the things that we said wrong.
Yes. Not all the things.
Or amp them up.
But
add to them, modify.
Calibrate maybe, perhaps. Yeah. But before we go into that, I do want to make a little note and a nod to the fact that if you are not just listening to us, in the audio podcast, but actually watching us on YouTube, I do want to make a note, because I would want it to be made for myself. We changed studios last year, because we moved into a new place. And when we interviewed you last time, we had a different set outside.
Yes.
And this is the first time we've been in this studio with a third person. And I don't think we've worked out all the bugs yet. So
it's a little cozy.
It's a very small, tight studio. Yeah. And so I just want to acknowledge that we're a little intimate right now.
Yeah. Well, it's nice seeing you so tall.
And that's the other thing, is that I'm boosted up. So it's probably on the video going to look like you're shorter or around the same size as me, but you're actually a half a foot taller than I am in real life.
In real life. This is not real life, though.
This is not real life. This is all smoke and mirrors. But yes, so I'm going to enjoy the view for the first time.
Fantastic.
Right. As being around the same height as you are.
Yeah.
And then Joel, of course, always looks like a giant.
Always towering.
Yes.
Okay, though. I'll do my best.
I look up to you.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Even more so right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that said, I just want to make a little nod to that, in case Jonathan looks demure.
So let me zoom in on the framework here.
Okay.
Let me jump into this today. So we talked about this a couple episodes ago. We talked about 4 different ways to look at your challenges you're facing through the lens of like gameplay, or you have a lot of experience leading like Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy role-playing games, Jonathan. So this is where this came from, kind of a gameplay storytelling device.
Yes.
We talked about 4 different places that a character might find themselves in a role-playing game, getting past a barrier, solving a puzzle, getting in a trap and having to get out of that, or fighting the battle. So we kind of laid down those beats. We can go over those in detail again, but I think we can expand upon this a little bit today as well and dig into some of the details, nuance, and some of the broader concepts that come from it.
Well, but you just mentioned something about its point of origin, that it comes from role playing. But what actually is the point of origin for these 4 different?
I do want to give a shout out to one of my friends. So when I first started doing tabletop role playing games, there was not a lot of framework for how to design it. So a friend of mine, John 4 of Role Playing Tips, he said, "Well, how about if you use Hamlet's story beats?" And he created the infamous 5-room dungeon. And it's a great model. But he uses 4 story beats in that. And what I realized is, as I'm designing these, dungeons for role players to explore and interact, I realized there's a lot of this art that's imitating life. And that's when I realized there's these 4 problems in life. Like, it's usually a barrier of some kind, or it's a puzzle to be solved. Sometimes there's a trick or a trap that sets you back and takes something from you. And then finally, there's like a conflict, or what we might call like a boss battle. And so y'all talked about that a little bit, but yeah, it would be great to expand upon that and talk more about how to apply that diagnostic to solve your problems in your life.
Yeah.
So for the uninitiated, when you said Hamlet's for story beats, where does that come from?
I believe it comes from Hamlet.
Oh.
That's as much as I know. And when John took off and said, like, these are the 4 beats of any story, I cannot help but anytime I watch a movie now, anytime I watch a movie or read a story, I'm like, there's those 4 beats over and over and over again. And something that maybe was mentioned in the podcast is these story beats don't necessarily follow a specific order.
Yeah.
They can go, if you listen to the podcast, barrier, puzzle, trap, conflict, culminating with a boss battle or a fight. But sometimes, as is in all of life and great storytelling, they don't follow a script. That makes it dynamic and interesting.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that we focus here at Personality Hacker ultimately is helping people diagnose what's going on for them, right? And I think if you have a really clear problem, like you're listening or watching right now, you've got a really clear problem at like your knee hurts, like real physical. I'll just use a physical problem. Your knee hurts. You go to the doctor, they identify what's wrong with it. They either give you medicine or treatment. You figure out how to get your knee better. And that's like very direct. But when it comes to our personal growth or our personal relationships or our personality, and we get into challenges in life, not only is it not clear, like not only do we not know how to maybe solve the issue we're facing, we don't even really know what that issue is. Like it's hard to get definition around it. I love the idea of role playing, like people almost in a way putting an imagination into something to kind of guess, okay, what is going on for me? We use our imaginations to do this. And then these little frameworks we have, like the car model in our personality owner's manual, for example, it's a framework we use to help diagnose, okay, which part of your personality is showing up? What's got you in a grip or a loop or whatever? There's these little frameworks along with some imagination we can use to help us get a sense of these more esoteric, subjective challenges we face. Like it's not a knee hurting that we just go get a doctor medicine for. So that's what I love about frameworks like this. And that's why it's useful. That's why we're talking about it. It's not this isn't just a curiosity. We use these kinds of tools in our discovery calls, in our workshops, in our coaching. And you've been involved with a lot of these, Jonathan. You're in our Personality Life Path mentorship program as one of our facilitators, help our community. And I think it's really cool how you've been using some of these ideas with our actual students and clients. So I just want to say that as you're listening or watching along, this isn't just play talk. We're not just ideating on something random or abstract here. We actually use what we're talking about today with our clients and students.
Yeah. Well, what I realized is our problems are constantly changing and evolving right before our eyes.
Yeah.
So it's a moving target. And that's why having a constant framework like the car model, like the 4 beats of a story is really important.
Yeah. Because we have to re-diagnose all the time.
Because
we're like, okay, what's going on today?
It's dynamic.
Yeah.
So it's very helpful to have a constant framework, like a tool that you can constantly use over and over again to help solve your problems.
That's the power of type.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why it works.
So let's go into these 4 beats. And we talked a little bit about them on the we spent the entire podcast discussing them. And you listened to the podcast and you said, no, it was better than you thought, which is good.
I loved it. Yeah.
But what did we miss on these 4 beats?
So
what can we add?
Well, what I was thinking is, okay, so my best fit type is ENFJ. So I lead with extroverted feeling harmony. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I gave my extroverted judging function a character type for each to help me solve each of these problems? And so I thought, okay, to solve a barrier, I would say I'm going to use the guide, the extroverted feeling analytic guide that kind of knows what to do and follow the standard procedure in order to solve a problem. For a puzzle, I thought I'm going to use the performer. That's what I've named my holistic, creative ENFJ type. It's the performer. I'm going to come up with, non-traditional ways to solve problems.
Yeah.
And then for the trap, I'm thinking I'm going to use the doula. That's the name I gave my holistic, extroverted feeling. It's a very caretaking, extroverted feeling. It's going to help move you through something very painful. And then finally, you could probably guess for a boss fight, I'm going to have to bring back analytic, extroverted feeling that's very dominant. And I call him, what do I call him? The conductor. Yeah, because I'm, almost like conducting an orchestra saying, this is the way life is going to be and you're all going to get in line and follow me. Okay. Yeah. And so those are I thought if everyone listening could just take their dominant judging function and create a character, 4 different characters, you might be able to figure out a way to solve these problems and meet these dungeons.
you're using subtypes to do this.
Yes.
The archetype or the framework of subtypes to be.
And you talk about the subtypes in a couple of your podcasts, like the career types of the ENFJ that I listen to. There's like 4 subtypes of an ENFJ.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then you're also hearkening to the 2 different flavors of each of the functions. Mm-hmm. You've got the more analytic version of extroverted feeling or harmony, and then the more holistic version of extroverted feeling or harmony. So you're using whichever of the ways of looking at your type, your subtype, or the function itself to help create like an archetype or a character.
I just gave it a name as a character. Like, okay, this is what my, dominant extroverted feeling looks like. It's a conductor. Mm. Yeah.
All right. So not just looking at the model. So if you're listening, you're not just looking at the model and trying to figure out what's going on in your life, but also what part of you is the best part to meet the challenge that you're facing.
Exactly. Yeah. Because again, the problem is going to change over and over again. And I have a couple of ideas of like problems that I've solved in my life that I'm like, okay, what kind of extroverted feeling was the best tool for this job? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can we do a little application just to play with this idea?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of years ago, I was having some challenge with my then, was he 14 at the time, son? Mm-hmm. My son Sawyer, ESTJ. Right around the beginning of COVID, we had a little bit of a falling out, the 2 of us. And for various reasons, we weren't able to communicate. Like he wouldn't take my calls, it wasn't working out. So if I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this is a problem, I need to communicate with my son and reestablish connection and relationship with him. Mm-hmm. It's COVID, it's hard, I can't do it physically. I had some limitations. There's some challenges maybe with my co-parent, his mother on the other side. So obviously this is from my standpoint, this is a great place to start to diagnose something. Okay, so where am I at? Am I at a barrier? Is this a puzzle to solve? Is this a trap? When we talked about trap on the episode before, it's like letting something die or letting it go, grieving something, or is this a boss battle? Should I go into a direct conflict with my ex-wife? Or So those are like the questions that would surface. Now I'm past this point, so I'm using it in retro because it's not a current, I don't know if it matters, it's not a current challenge, but as I think about that, I'm like, okay, how do I think about that? So how would you start? If you're looking at a problem like that, how do we triangulate?
Perfect.
Well, and just as a moment, we didn't actually define all 4 of them yet. So should we just go ahead and do a review?
Yeah, and I have a distinction to help you understand which is each. So a barrier is really asking the question, why has no one else done this before? Mm. So, and I'm back up a little bit even further. Before you engage in problems and conflicts in your life, you have to ask yourself, what's the question you're trying to answer?
Yeah.
And you think about every story, every movie you've watched, there's a question that must be answered that begins the story. I love Lord of the Rings, so I use this as an example oftentimes. Will the ring be destroyed? That's really the question that needs to be answered. And there's a series of problems that lead up to that. So the most important thing in your life is to realize when you're going through problems, make sure you know what the question is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so in your case, Joel, it's like, will I have connection with my son?
Yeah.
That's the question. It's important to keep that as the center. It's really a quest.
Well, I would just say from there, it's like, well, yes, connection now, but it has so much more meaning for his future. Like I probably would have even framed it as like, oh no, if I don't figure this out, his whole life's going to be ruined. I would have all these abstractions in the future. But I guess if I had to define it as the problem in the moment, it's like, I just need to reestablish connection to get that going again. Mm. I probably would have, at the time as you talked to me, I would have had a lot of anxiety around all the meaning that came from that, like the consequences of that not happening, more than actually focusing on the problem itself. So just getting clearly defined around the question, the problem itself is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
And I know this too, but getting really clear on that is really important at the beginning.
Yeah. If you do not know what question you're asking, a lot of life can feel meaningless.
Yeah.
So keeping that paramount. And there's all many questions, of course, day to day, but there's the ultimate question.
So then I would say, how can I get a connection back with my son to where I can influence his life to what I believe is the positive to create success in his life? Like that would be the way I'd ask it.
Yeah. And so the barrier is really a guardian. It's a blockage. It's something that's standing in your way. And it's really the price of admission to answer your question. Usually it requires a level of permission, but the big question that the barrier is asking is, why has no one else done this before? Why? And really you're asking, why have I never done this before? Yeah. So, an example from my own life is like back in 2020, we had to find a new place to live. So the question was, will Jonathan find a new place for his family to live? The barrier was the housing market. It was absolutely terrible. We got outbid 7 times. anything we went to get a new house, there was a big barrier. It was the real estate market.
Yeah.
And so solving that problem requires something very specific that each barrier is really looking for. It's looking for some way to get past the barrier.
Almost like a key for a lock.
It could be a key. It could be a key. It could be, and that's a good point, is I might have to go get something from somebody else in order to get past the barrier.
Yeah.
It could be a special skill. It could also be finding another way, which is what I did. I bought an RV.
Yeah.
And said, okay, I'm going to go around the housing market. I'm just going to buy an RV, and then we have house on wheels. So it required a little bit of creativity, but I still got through the barrier.
Yeah. Okay. So now puzzle.
Yep.
Qualitative.
Yeah. So puzzle is basically, I always think of puzzles as like a big question mark. It's just when you get past the barrier, there's usually something within your problem or within the quest that you're trying to answer that doesn't make sense. It's something that's out of place. It's something that's confusing, and it's usually something that you're not equipped for. I think if you think about, like, if there is a game master that's designing all this for us, the puzzle is designed to actually confuse us, puzzle us, to tell us like, okay, you have all this skill, but I'm going to design a challenge for you where you can't use your traditional methods. I think barriers a lot of times are very standard operating. Like, you use a very specific set of skills that works for you all the time. But the puzzles, I think like the story trope of the skill monkey.
Yeah.
They're like kind of useless characters throughout any kind of story, but when a puzzle arrives, they tend to shine. Like, they're a useless character, but they're great at picking locks, and that's about it. So that's really you calling upon a part of yourself that you don't traditionally use. It's usually a creative part, and you come up with a creative solution to that. And so in my own life, I realized, okay, if I just combined summer camp, working in a kitchen for the year, getting an RV, then I can solve this problem by almost like piecemealing the solutions together.
So I'm already seeing a distinction here too. A barrier is pretty obvious and seen.
Yes.
It's a barrier.
Very
I see it
objective.
right there.
Yeah.
And I can point to it and show other people. A puzzle might have some obfuscation or hidden parts to it.
Nothing is as it seems. Usually I think like those little dolls where you open up a doll and one's inside and you open up another. It's a mystery box.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with puzzles, the cost that's associated with it is usually distraction and time. Puzzles in our life are usually the problems that waste our time. And you get to a point, like we were building a barbecue pit yesterday, and there was a point where it's like, if I continue to put this barbecue pit together, is it worth having the burgers at the end? Because it might be easier for me just to go buy the burgers than spend all the time building the barbecue pit. So the puzzles take a lot of our time and energy and distraction. They take a lot of our attention away from the quest. That's one of their designs. But the benefit of it is a lot of time you get something magical. You get a boon that helps you out in your life quest later on.
Right.
It's almost like a side quest then too.
It can be. Yeah, exactly.
There was, after our last podcast, I believe a listener commented that they believe that puzzles are sometimes solved by us needing to grow up in some way. That they felt that, it's like if maybe you can't solve this puzzle until you get more mature, or that's like part of it. And there are puzzles, I bet there's multiple kinds, but there are some puzzles that I've not been able to solve for years. It's almost like I just have to kind of put them on a shelf and go, I guess that's something I deal with later. Until I've learned different lessons, and now I can apply my new way of thinking to solving this puzzle in my life.
Yeah, and I think going back to the barrier, a lot of times you're equipped for the barrier. It's just going to be the cost of resource or time. Like if you want to get a degree, I think you mentioned, like you probably are ready to get the degree. It's just about going through the process, very standard process of going through the barrier.
Yeah.
But puzzles, you may have not be able to solve them until you defeat the boss or come back to it later. And so there's got to be a way for us in our life to set puzzles aside, to tag them for later and say, oh, I'm going to come back to this.
Can we give a tangible example at all of what we're talking about? Because this is pretty abstract.
Yeah. So I think,
what's the example of that? Setting a puzzle aside.
Well, a good puzzle would be like, I think honestly, a lot of time, puzzles are also associated with people because people are honestly the most puzzling thing in the universe. Mm-hmm. Very dynamic. Getting into an argument, a lot of times is a puzzle because each of you may not even know what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. You're digging through, sorting through something, trying to find the lever that's going to get you out of the dungeon.
Yeah.
I think of puzzles as like levers that like release. Oh, in Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, there's a great scene where the protagonist is in this room and these spikes are about to close in down on top of him, but he's got to communicate through a 5-foot brick wall to someone also on the other side who's in a bug infested room, and she's got to find the lever. So, and they're actually arguing during this scene. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's a lot of puzzles is like when we get into arguments or negotiations with people that it might be helping or hindering us, we might have to say, okay, we're going to set that puzzle aside. Now, of course, if there's something really on the line, you just have to solve it very quickly, pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah. We have a puzzle in our life, and I would say, or at least I feel like we do, and that's how Piper gets educated. Like, like we in the early days, we didn't put her in traditional school because we just travel too much. Like we'd be in trouble with truancy all the time if she went to traditional school. And so we pulled her out and we homeschool her. But the challenge, of course, is that like, I mean, I'm not an early childhood educator. So it's always been like, okay, so how do I, like, what's the methodology?
Here's how shadow theory works.
Yeah, exactly. What's the methodology?
That'll be good for you at 7 years old.
My kids know type. That's what they know. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The kinds of education that I do are very much not, like basic multiplication or whatever. She's 12 now, so she's entering 7th grade. And I think we've kind of figured some things out, but we still, it's like, okay, so this year Joel's going to educate her and I'm going to take over a little bit more operations in the company. Where it's always been the opposite before. And we just keep trying different methods to see if this will, I don't think she's uneducated by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the big question is like, are we doing a good enough job is always my question. Right.
Yeah.
And so we keep trying different methodologies to see if this is the one that sticks. This is the one that really nails it down.
Well said. Yeah. I think puzzles require a lot of times, try this, not this.
Right.
Try that. It becomes a test because no one's seen the puzzle before. It's not standard like a barrier. It's not like a moat around the castle where you just have to swim across and dodge the alligators. This is something that's the dungeon has designed to trip you up. Yeah. It might be a new technology. Yeah.
So like, and I'm just thinking of like real practical basic things. Like, let's say somebody's watching or listening right now has roommates and they're trying to do their studies out in the main room, like the main living space, but their roommate wants to watch TV. And their schedules are off. Well, this creates like a puzzle for living together. Like you're going to create conflict and maybe you try it. Well, how about we have hours we trade off? You do it this night. I do it this night. It's not working. You try it a different night. So you like keep arranging things to make sure it's working for all parties. That's kind of what we're talking about. Something like that.
Well, and back to my housing example, like the initial barrier was the housing market, but the puzzle was, okay, what do we do about income while we're in the RV? And we had to generate like, okay, my wife, Ellen, does nursing and then I work in a kitchen and then our kids have to manage themselves. Yeah. And then we had to rent out our RV. Like a lot of things had to come together all at once.
This is all during COVID, right?
Yes.
Like, we're trying to figure all this out during COVID.
Right.
So easy.
It was very complicated. And that's at least my relationship to puzzles are like, okay, I really have to use all parts of my brain to really think of the best solution. And I don't think it's ever going to be elegant. It's never straightforward like a barrier problem would be.
Right.
Puzzles are oftentimes, they require you to solve the problem with not your skill set. Okay. So that's usually the best thing.
So I was thinking MacGyver, that is his skill set.
Oh, he's great.
But he's using it with not his resource, I guess. So even though he's using his skill set, he's got to use whatever he's got available.
Well, so that's why we like MacGyver, because people like me watching it like, oh my gosh, he's just solving puzzles all the time.
Yeah, it's a puzzle
show. When you think, oh, he's not skilled for that, he brings out bubblegum and duct tape and makes something amazing.
By the same token, though, I think that trope has become imprinted on our mind that that's how you're supposed to solve a puzzle. And a puzzle, like you mentioned, like the person who does gadgetry in the story, who doesn't really have a role until they have to go pick the lock. They almost always just sort of waltz up and they do it in this sort of beautiful way. Or like the coder comes in and like hacks into the system, and they're in. And so I think I get this idea that puzzles are solved elegantly by somebody who has the know-how. And
Right.
and when you say actually it's a lot of test, iterate, and throw and trying to kind of figure it out, that's been my experience with puzzles in my life. Is it's the opposite of elegant.
Well, and it's true. Like when we see stories, a lot of times we're watching a fictional character, but really if you look at like any group, like an Ocean's 11 kind of story, or where there's a band of heroes, like in Lord of the Rings or Indiana Jones, and in some ways MacGyver, it's really showcasing parts of ourself. And that's when I found out these rooms of a dungeon are applicable to me, because I am the skill monkey that picks the lock, but at least there's a part of me that's like that.
Right.
Now I might identify more heavily with like, oh no, I'm going to solve problems the standard way and use a tried and true situation that always helps me. That works with barriers.
Right.
But when I come to a puzzle, I need to call on a part of myself that thinks outside the box, that is inventing technology for the first time, testing things out.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a little more nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to traps.
All right. So traps, the original name was like setback or trick. And the whole purpose of traps is a little insidious. It's to drain the resources of the main character right before the final test. And so I think from an audience standpoint, it showcases, does the character really care about this quest? Do you really want it? We're about to take everything from you. We're about to put you in a no-win situation where you're not going to win either way. But it's going to, the gift of the trap is to showcase the character's willpower. And that's how you know you've gone through a trap in your life. That's how you know you've gone through a trap room, is you discover this willpower that you didn't know you had before. And so, I mean, you said on the podcast, and it's absolutely right. A good trap is designed where you're going to lose something either way. So,
well, I was going to say this could also be surrender, not just resourcefulness. Like how I interpreted it a lot is, and in a lot of movies, it's almost like the character goes, okay, fine, I lose. I give up. I've invested. I did everything I could. I thought I was going to win this, and it didn't work. I lost it all. I hit bottom. I surrender to it. And I've noticed that, like, in popular media, when that happens, it's almost like something resurrects them, like magical or coincidence or a luck or something supernatural. If it's a supernatural show, like something happens to where the character gets revived, not by their own power, but through the surrender of some higher power or force around them, brings them back into the game. But you're talking about being resourceful and overcoming, like there's also characters that go, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to push through the barrier.
Either way, I still think it's an internal battle of willpower, because oftentimes if you look through good storytelling and movies, the character's stripped of all the resources.
Yeah.
Kind of look Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. There's that part when they have to all get in the minecart to escape the flood, to escape everybody, but they can't take their inventory with them. They can't take everything with them. They look battered, bruised, beaten. I mean, they've lost almost everything, and they're now about to go into a giant conflict with nothing but barely the clothes on their back. So it really builds tension. But ultimately, the traps are designed there to showcase us. Do we really care?
So the movie that comes up for me is the movie I just made you watch.
Yes, I was thinking.
I'm making everybody watch it right now, because it's not a new movie. It was made in, I think, 2015 or something. It's called Whiplash. And it's about a kid who wants to be one of the greats as a jazz drummer, and his relationship with this teacher or mentor that is, it's pretty abusive. Yeah. But what I love about the movie is that it's actually quite ambiguous. It asks the question, do the ends justify the means? And it doesn't answer it, right? And just when you think it's leaning one way or the other, it actually, like, I think they stuck the landing perfectly on not giving an answer, on making it totally ambiguous, and you have to answer it for yourself. But there is a moment, and I don't want to give it away because it's such a fabulous movie.
It's such a good example, though. It's really hard not to give it away.
But there's a moment in the movie when the main character realizes that they have been put into a trap.
Yeah.
They have been completely set up to be humiliated.
Yep.
And they leave dejected. But then there's this moment when they're like, no, if I allow myself to be stripped of all resource in this moment, I'm not. I'm never. I might as well just roll over. Like this is death for me. So I'm going to actually communicate that I care. I'm going to turn right back and I'm going to take over the situation.
And we didn't talk about this earlier, but he did actually lose something. And again, I really don't want to give spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Should we get
it off now? Just fast forward like 30 seconds through.
So good. It's such a good movie. If you have not seen it yet, you should go see it.
I think the visceral feeling anyone gets when they see that any point in the movie like that, or any point in the story, you're just like, oh, the loss. Like, no, like
you were so close.
You're so close to getting something, and you just keep getting knocked down.
Yes.
And once again, I think the blessing in these insidious traps is it resurrects your willpower.
Yeah.
It lets you know you actually care.
What did he lose in that moment, since we've already told people spoilers?
I think he lost a little bit of his relationship with his father.
Mm-hmm.
I think he pulled away from his father. He became a man.
Yes.
He pulled away from the caregiving of his dad.
Yes.
And he stepped into a new authority in his life.
Yes.
And so I think that's what he had to give up.
I think you're right. Yeah. And that's why that scene of his father watching him during that end moment, his father is in awe of him, but also a little scared, and probably registering that his nurturing was rejected.
Or not needed as much.
Or not needed.
Maybe not rejected. Well, I guess it could be rejected.
Well, kind of. Yeah. He had to contend with his stuff too. That's totally
It's a good movie, though. If you haven't watched it yet, you should watch this. Whiplash.
So the trap, though, is a moment of loss right before the battle at the end.
Right, the battle. And the battle is designed, again, just to answer the question. Super direct. And that's when you need to call upon a part of yourself that is direct. Every single one of us has access to this very direct judging function. In my case, extroverted feeling. And it's really, it's very quite simple. Will the hero complete the quest? And usually it's a yes, no, but as all things in life, it is very dynamic. And oftentimes it tells you that the story's over, and or at least the conflict's over. The conflict has an answer to the question. So it's usually the last couple of minutes of the movie, but in our own life, it's, the ultimate question is, will we have a happy life? Will we reach our goal in life? But it requires this is unfortunate because a lot of times we want to create win-win scenarios. And honestly, this is a win-lose.
Yeah.
And I will say this, even if you negotiate, because every battle is really a battle over a thing. So, if this is what I wanted, this coffee cup in my hand is something that I wanted, and you happen to be the villain of the story and you want the exact same thing, well, we both can't have what we want. So that's a win-lose situation. I'm going to have to battle it out for it. But if we create a win-win, well, guess what is lost? My desire. I have to change a little bit of what I wanted for the sake of something higher.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is where we make concession during battles, which is totally okay, but it still should be your choice. That's why it's so important to go through the trap, is because it really refines your will and your desire. Yeah.
It helps you clarify what you really want.
Yes.
Out of all of it. And if you are willing to compromise, maybe.
And the loss you're willing to take.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It gives you an example of what loss feels like, so that you can go into the final battle with some information and knowledge. And
an appreciation for what you're about to face. It's a sobriety.
Yeah.
And honestly, a respect for that which opposes you.
Yeah. Okay.
Man, by the way, I just want to say with Whiplash, thank you for saying that's what he lost at the end, because now I'm reframing the entire movie into showcasing the movie is really the relationships he's willing to sacrifice.
Yes.
There's other ones we don't talk about on here in order to be great.
Yeah.
And I never thought, he's going to also have to sacrifice his relationship with his father until you just said that just now. I'm like, that's exactly what he has to do to be great, because his father it was too comfortable. He couldn't go and do what he had to do if his father would always save him and make it comfortable for him.
Well, he didn't have to sacrifice the relationship, but he had to sacrifice the nature of it.
Yeah, the qualitative nature of the relationship. That's
something has to change. Yeah,
exactly.
That was brilliant, though. Thank you.
So, so then that's the overview, and that's like a nice. We talked a little bit about that in the first episode on this subject, and then that was like a good overview with some commentary. So let's add to it a little bit more.
Well, can I use my example now to try to triangulate? Let's go back to Sawyer, my son, who I was dealing with this a while back. Now, as you're talking through these four, I'm going, actually, it's probably a little bit of all four of them in the challenge. So again, I'm trying to relate this to somebody listening or watching right now, how they can apply this to their life. Like look at a real challenge in your life, identify it like I did with my son, and now look at it through this lens. So what's the barrier? What's the trap? What's the loss? And what's the battle? Or maybe it's just one of those or a couple of those. So how could I approach that? What's like the starting place? If you've identified something, let's say you and your roommate can't get along, or you and your partner keep having the same argument, or I can't get along with my son. That's my challenge.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing you could take action on is honestly give character names to your judging functions, because really a lot of times or whatever your hero function is too, your driver function is a heroic part of you. And so giving that a specific name, and I would do it in 4 parts, 4 characters that can solve these problems. And what you'll find is you probably have an avoidance of one of these kinds of problems in life.
Yeah.
And there's a nature that things that we don't complete in our life tend to come back. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what that's called, but it's almost feels like a carousel or a turnstile that if I don't solve this problem in my life, it will come back to me in another form.
Yeah. In certain, it's called Go Relationships in Harville Hendricks model, I think, meaning that basically anything you don't solve in a relationship, when the relationship ends, you're going to recreate it in the next one until you solve it.
And the purpose, I mean, you talk about like complexes and archetypes and the psyche. And I think, oh man, that is like our psyche is a rich underworld. It's a rich part of us. It's a universe waiting to be explored and discovered, but it's full of a lot of monsters, a lot of complexes and a lot of stuff that we haven't dealt with. We've just collected over the years. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot like a dungeon or a movie that requires the conflict to be massaged out of it. And we do that through our heroic functions, I think for our first and second functions, really, most of the time. But the step 1, I think it should be required that everyone takes a step and say, okay, I have 4 parts of me that can solve these 4 problems. And then second step is identify which one you're a little hesitant to solve. And that tends to keep stacking up in your life.
It's interesting. I know that you said you hate traps, right, Joel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And traps are, like I said, the definition of a trap is you will lose something, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking like that access is, workshopping, that access is a little bit of like a holistic, diffuse, judging or perceiving function part of you. And I wonder if you reflect on that and think, okay, where do I have access in that? What kind of person am I when I access that diffuse, holistic, judging or perceiving function?
Okay, so I look at it like the barrier would be making a connection with him long distance. Like that would be I could identify that as the barrier, and the character would maybe be my extrovert intuition. In a way, my instinct is to put myself in more of a salesman character. And the reason why is I've done sales before, and I can't predict when someone's going to answer the phone on the other end. My job as a salesperson for outbound cold calling is a number of dials I make a day. So it's making the dial, and then my job, that's what my job is.
That's great.
To dial the phone.
Yeah.
So if I put myself in that character, like I'm a salesperson in my salesperson character, well, that means I need to call every single day to try to make connection with him, no matter how many times he doesn't take my call, text or call every day. If I was in that framework and thinking that way, okay, getting past this barrier, I need to be relentless. Just like I would if I'm trying to get a hold of somebody to sell them on something. Like a salesperson pursuing a client or a lead, I would think of my son the same way. So I could step into that role for that particular challenge in the experience.
If it was a barrier.
Which I think there is a barrier aspect, because I couldn't get him on the phone. I could not connect with him. So that was the barrier, the initial barrier.
So what's interesting about that is, yes, that's very direct, and barriers usually require direct solutions, but puzzles and traps, I wonder if they require a little bit more finesse, diffuse energy. And so you might be thinking to yourself like, oh, wow, like that may be why I'm not solving this specific problem in my life, because I keep using the same persona. Yes. I keep using the same personality and part of myself that does work with barriers.
So then what I'm hearing, and not to distract from this, because I want to continue to use your example with Sawyer as a way to understand this concept. But what I'm hearing you say is that in order to meet these various styles of challenges in our life, we have to pull on different parts of who we are. Like different aspects, and have a flexibility about ourselves to meet the problem where it's at. Yeah. So if we're experiencing a barrier or a conflict, right, and battle, so to speak, we need a more assertive part of who we are. So if we struggle with assertion, those are probably the kinds of challenges that we like when that is the challenge that's meeting us, we tend to have a harder time getting to the other side of them.
Right.
Whereas with puzzles and traps, that might ask of us a more holistic or a more receptive part of who we are. And so if that's the challenge to pull on those parts of yourself, those are the challenges that are very difficult to get to the other side of.
Okay. Yeah. So somebody that has IFJ preferences, works in an office, someone keeps messing with their food in the office refrigerator. The battle or the direct thing would be to go confront the person or persons doing this.
Yeah.
But I know some IFJs who go, I don't feel comfortable being direct. I'm going to go and I'm going to create a policy. We're going to put signs up about not touching other people's foods. And we're going to do this very passively. We're going to put signs everywhere. The next office team meeting, we're going to make an announcement to everybody. Please don't touch everybody's food. When maybe a direct conversation with one person that's messing with the food would be a much more direct solution to this. But there's reticence because there's a little nervousness being direct. So it involves everybody as an example. So it's almost like that's maybe somebody using a different skill set when it's a direct conflict, quote unquote, battle to be had.
Yeah. To be fair though, I just want to make a comment because there's going to be some dominant IFJ out there that's like, no, I just go talk to the person I need to talk to.
Of course.
So I just want to make sure.
But there is an INFJ list or INFJ or ISFJ listening in our that does struggle with that. It does
have more receptive.
The assertiveness
That's
part.
the point though, because there are personality types that we might consider dominant, like say ENTJ, for example. But according to subtypes, you might have a completely holistic, extroverted thinking, introverted intuition.
Yeah.
That doesn't look like the stereotypical ENTJ.
Exactly. So that might have trouble going and being direct and nipping it in the bud.
Meaning like the stereotypes of personality don't always hold up. There requires like looking deeper at the functions, looking deeper at the subtypes.
Yep.
Yeah. But that's an example, I guess, of somebody potentially not addressing the problem where it lies. I guess that's my point to that. I'm not trying to pick on an IFJ that's struggling with that. I'm just trying to say we always put things on our terms that make us feel more comfortable. And it's probably, and then we find ourselves in the same challenges often. I'm sure I do the same thing. I don't like traps. I probably am filled with traps in my life because I hate them. And I'm always trying to solve them with barrier, puzzle, or battle. And I just hate dealing with it as it is. So clearly I'm going to have issue with that because I just avoid it all the time.
Yeah, I think they tend to stack up. It's almost like paperwork that just stacks up in our life.
Yeah.
If there's a grand master plan, these challenges, these problems in our life are here for a reason.
Yeah.
Sometimes we create them, that's for sure, but life affords many challenges and problems already, but we gain experience through challenge. Yeah. We gain willpower. And I mean, I think like using myself as an example, I had a situation where I work where I was caught in the middle of a 3-way argument where there was a boss, there was a family member of that boss, and then there was another coworker. And there was a lot of throwing under the bus, and I got caught in the crosshairs, and I was brand new. So I got everything dumped on me. And I was caught in a trap where if I...
You're not talking about me and Antonia, are you?
No, sorry.
Because you work with us. I'm like, oh, you're talking about us? Is this us? Is this covert for something?
Sorry, I was being way too vague. Yes. That did sound okay. That did sound just like that. But now I think about it.
No.
Maybe I get caught in these a lot more.
I was just kind of half kidding. Keep going.
Okay, so
but Joel was at fault, right?
Joel's at fault. Yes, of course. He's always high up there, dominating, towering over everybody. Yes. Anyway,
so you were kind of through a struggle.
Yeah. So I was. I realized that if I shared the information, I was either going to get someone fired or I was going to create a battle between the boss and the family. And so I felt like I was in a no-win situation. So I fell on my sword. I just admitted fault and took the hit. I apologized profusely and walked away. And what I lost was my pride and dignity in that situation. Yeah. But I was able to save a couple other things. That was a good example of a trap in my life. Like, okay, I'm not going to turn this into a battle. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, this felt like a trap. It felt like it was taking away my resource. It was threatening my willpower.
Yeah.
And again, the question was, where do we live during 2020? Mm-hmm. That was the drama that was unfolding. And probably being an ENFJ, usually most of my traps involve people in some regards.
Right.
But then later on, I had a battle in which another company said, hey, John, we want you to come work with us. We want you to move on property. We want to fund your housing, fund your Wi-Fi. And I knew it was a battle because I had two distinct choices. I was either going to live here or I was going to stay at the place we were at and try to rebuild relationships. And I thought, this is a battle because I'm going to say goodbye to this opportunity. But I'm so glad I went through the trap, the three-way argument conversation, because I realized, no, I want to stay here. I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my pride and allow a little misunderstanding to happen just for the sake of like, you know what? Hey, we're going to let everything, water under the bridge, and we're going to reforge relationships. And I realized when I got to the battle, which was a very direct, hey, we want you to come work for us or you stay here. I decided, no, I want to keep my family here at the camp where we live. And so I thought that's the beauty of like when you identify and diagnose the problem, you're able to call upon a part of yourself that's able to solve that problem.
Right.
Again, you don't send the skill monkey to go fight the boss because he's a glass cannon. He's going to get destroyed. There's parts of us that are fragile that are better at puzzles.
Yeah.
There's less at threat, but there's a tough part of us, an executive part of us, a decider, a very, assertive part of us that can handle those conflicts because it knows what it wants.
Yeah. So the situation with Sawyer, to go back to that.
Yeah.
There was a barrier. You couldn't get a hold of him. This was also during COVID. This is 2020. And some of the challenge had started before COVID. And then COVID then gave like almost right before.
Exacerbated it.
And it massively exacerbated it because we couldn't, and the co-parent was not allowing any sort of communication. And so the barrier then was a lack of being able to contact him. Yeah. But then you said it felt like a little bit of each. So how was it a puzzle?
Well, I don't think it's a puzzle. I'm thinking about it now, and I was going to say, I'm like, is it a puzzle, a trap? It was a barrier getting a hold of him because he would, if I did get a hold of him, he would hang up the phone, or it was very difficult. By the way, we're cool now. We're back in just so people know the ending. It's like we're still in a bad way. We're in a great way now.
Well, and I was going to say, because you've gotten to the other side of it, you actually know what it was. You can say what kind of challenge it was, and you can say what you needed in order to get to the other side.
Well, as you were talking, Jonathan, what I was coming up with this, I was like, well, what if you identify what the other person in this dynamic needs? Like, I realized that Sawyer was actually in a trap, and he didn't want to lose his pride.
So true.
And so he was, and I could have let my pride go down, but it wouldn't have helped him because he needed to, like, that was his job on his side to let his trap happen and his pride go. It wouldn't have helped for me to do that for him. Like, my job was to try to get a hold of him. Now, if I look back at that, I actually did fall down on the job. I didn't pursue him as much as I could. I tried a few times and I was like, okay. And then a few months, a month or so later, I'd try again. And then I would try again. Like, it was fits and starts. I wasn't as consistent or deliberate as I could have been. So as I review this, I'm like, I probably should have stepped into my like marketer, sales guy, and just send him a text about, hey man, think about you today. Give me a call when you get a chance. Just really show him that I was going to pursue him and cared.
You did that quite a bit though, didn't you?
I did, but I probably could have done more. Like, I'm thinking back. But his thing would have had to be, and he did, he had to surrender and lose face.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what got us back together. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm going, it was actually not much I could do. It was actually his hero's journey he was on because I didn't cut off connection with him.
Right.
He cut off with me, right? So it was his work to have to do on his side. And he didn't have any parent to coach him or help him with that.
And what you're talking about is we're on other people's timelines many times as well. Everyone's going on their own journey. Everyone's got their own story, their own characters that they're calling upon to solve life's challenges. Yeah. And it's mixed. It gets so complicated.
Well, it's letting me off the hook a little to realize, well, maybe I shouldn't own as much as I'm owning. It's helping me right now in real time.
That's awesome.
I really owned all of it for him and us. Well, actually, he had some responsibility on his side too. If he's in the trap, he has to do that for himself. Like, I can't do that for him. Now, I could have been better at the barrier part. I don't think there's a puzzle to solve, except maybe a creative way to get a hold of him or something. And there's really no direct conflict with him. It would have been with his mother.
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that. That wouldn't have helped the situation. So I think we played it well. It all worked out. I mean, there was some time lost, 18 months lost. We lost relationship from, but we're reinstated now and we've been doing a lot of healing together.
That's beautiful.
So I think it helped me also realize, okay, as we diagnose these 4 places, sometimes what I think is my responsibility may be somebody else's responsibility in the story for their side.
So I have this rule at I have a homeschool Dungeons and Dragons table, and kids like to reach in and role play for each other's characters oftentimes. And so I invented a term, say, hey, don't go kart each other. And if you think about it, if you go to a Go Kart amusement park and you're sitting in the Go Kart seat, how much fun would it be for someone to sit in your seat and drive the Go Kart for you?
Yeah.
That would not be fun. You want to play. And so I tell the kids, don't Go Kart each other. And I think what you're talking about is sometimes we do have to let someone else play the game of life, so to speak. And we have to sit back and rest.
Yeah.
Just watch, become a viewer. That can be incredibly difficult. Sometimes just to watch it happen because especially as a parent too.
Yeah.
That's a big part of being a dad is just realizing, okay, this is a part where I get to watch and my kid is performing.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So the first piece is to diagnose what kind of challenge you're experiencing.
Yeah.
The second piece is what part of you is the right tool for the job or the right aspect of yourself to meet the challenge where it's at. And a third aspect I'm hearing is to determine whether or not it's your challenge or somebody else's challenge. And you're just sort of observing this thing. And that's part of it. Part of it is, I mean, that almost feels like a trap in and of itself. It's like you just have to kind of let.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're on this together.
Yeah.
The best thing we can do for ourselves, for the world, is to be healthy.
Yeah.
To develop, to individuate, to like be a light, because we're the sum of the 5 people we spend the most amount of time with.
Yeah.
And if people aren't getting their act together and their life together, and it's going to make things difficult for the rest of us. So we're really all moving towards something great. But yeah, it's a lot of it's just waiting on people.
Yeah, I find that to go back to what aspect of ourselves do we need? Joel is definitely the more assertive person. So I could see how puzzles and traps are difficult for you, Joel. For me, I'm the opposite. I tend to be, I'm a harmonizing subtype. So I tend to be more holistic. And I have to sort of shore myself up to enter direct conflict. Like once I'm there, I don't actually mind being the bad guy. And when you were saying that a trap leads to the end conflict, I think going through some major traps in my life have made me better at going through conflict, honestly. Because it's like, what are you going to do to me that?
Yeah.
Like I already got my leg blown off in that previous trap.
Right.
Like, what are you going to do to me?
Oh yeah.
Right. It feels that way.
Yeah.
And so some of the biggest traps, I mean, leaving the religion of my youth and then having to lose everybody through all of that. That was the worst trap I've ever been through. Yeah. Right. It was like, it really was a trap. It was like, I either lose me or I lose everyone else. And I was like, well, I think I'm going to choose me. And so I lost everybody else. But at that point, it made it so that I know what I'm willing to risk. I know what I'm willing to do. I know that my own mind and what makes sense to me, my interests are something that I will fight for. And so then when I go into conflict, even though I hate it, I'm like, and I usually get really upset that the person kind of put me in a place where I have to do this now, but I'm willing to be the bad guy because I'm the bad guy for a lot of people already. And so it's much easier to enter conflict, even though I don't particularly like it, but I can feel myself be reticent. If it's head-to-head conflict, I'm like, oh, can I just turn this back into a trap? Can I just lose something instead?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
As opposed to have to deal with this like zero-sum game. Yeah.
There's a 5th room that we didn't talk about, and it's one of my favorites. And I think I learned this a lot through my life, especially in hospice care. It's the reward, the room where you get the reward or the rest. And it's one of my favorite movie scenes or story scenes. There's like when 2 characters get trapped in a cave or a mine collapse or something, or an elevator stops, and they have this really good heart-to-heart waiting. It's the liminal space. They get a little bit of their resource back. They have a cathartic moment. And that's the room of rest. It's really the 5th room that kind of ties all this together. And it's peppered throughout the adventure. It's peppered throughout our life. And it provides relief from our problems. So life is not just constantly one problem after another. Like there's a point where we get restored, we get renewed, we get rested. And it's one of my favorite rooms. I love to talk about it and live for it because I think it's one of the reasons I'm here is to help people see, like, look for the reward. I mean, after you've gone through the conflict, there's always treasure at the end of the dragon fight. Yeah. There always is.
Could it also be insight and understanding?
Yes, absolutely.
Because if we go back to Whiplash, and I've seen this in a lot of movies, before the trap happens, before the loss happens and then the big battle, there's often a moment where the main character gets to have a direct conversation with the antagonist. The protagonist and antagonist find themselves in a conversation. Yeah. And then it's the trap and then the battle. And in Whiplash, certainly that happens at that jazz club. And we even see that like with Darth Vader and Skywalker early on in the story. Like the two characters have this moment and then they're going to go away and they're going to fight it out later. But that's almost like a restful room. It's like a reward in its own way earlier in the story where there's insight created. So a reward could be like you get the thing, but you could also get wisdom, insight, understanding about what's happening to you altogether.
A revelation. Yeah. A discovery, new just understanding of life unlocked. And it's so surprising and it's important. I say this out loud to mostly remind myself, look for the reward, because a lot of times it doesn't have like lights shining down on it. Eat at Joe's. It's not a big neon sign saying, hey, this is where you're supposed to take a break.
And maybe somebody won't hand it to you. You've got to take it for yourself.
Absolutely. It's just sitting there.
Yes.
It's just waiting, and it requires you to go over and pick it up and claim it for your own.
Yeah.
And there's so much about rest, true restoration that we have to reclaim for our own. But we have to look for it. And we have to recognize it when we see it. And I wonder how many times we go from problem to problem to problem, and we never think, hey, there's something good out here too, right? It's not just one insidious problem after another. There is some benevolence in this design, and this nice oasis is made for me. I'm going to take advantage of that and rest here.
Yeah. I think all the challenges that I've gone through on the other side, minimum, I got opportunity. But I almost always have been able to drum up an opportunity I never thought of before, wasn't really part of my paradigm before the big challenge. But the other thing, and this is something that I think gaming, actually, to go back to this analogy, has taught me is I always gain XP, right? XP standing for experience points.
Yeah.
And there have been time periods in my life where I've gone through something that was so difficult. Like I didn't really even think that I was going to be able to make it through, but then I did. And I can almost feel myself level up, right? Like, and if you're not a gamer, what ends up happening when you play video games and you play a game where you level up, that experience, you have usually bars like health bars or what they call mana bars, which is like your magic points, or like shield bars, depending upon the kind of game you're playing. But those bars deplete as you're going through battles and as you're going through, every time you get hit or every time you don't have food for that day or whatever it is, like those bars start getting lower and lower and lower. And then all of a sudden you level up. And part of the level up process is not only do you gain new skills or get new objects and items, but those bars go back up to 100. And it's almost like you just, the level up is like all of a sudden now you're replenished and you're ready to go again. And I've discovered that in a lot of the challenges that I've experienced, I can almost feel myself level up. It's like, I didn't think I was going to be able to make it any further, but now all of a sudden I'm refreshed and I don't even know how it happened. I don't remember going into the restoration room. I just know that all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have what it takes to get to the end of this, or I got to the end of the challenge and then all of a sudden I leveled up. And so part of the reward for me is to try to figure out ways that I've leveled up. Right. Like how did I learn new skills? How did I learn how to deal with something that just a couple of years ago would have been unthinkable to go through? But now I'm like, oh, I can do that now. Like we're experiencing a lot of stress right now in the company. It just happens to be that time period. And I know that if I was experiencing what we're experiencing now 6 years ago, I'd be like, I legit would think I could not do it. I'm like, no, this is way too heavy of a lift. We're going to have to find some other way of doing it. But at this point, for the last 6 years of whatever it is we've gone through, I'm like, oh no, I can totally deal with that. I mean, not happily, I don't like it.
That's our next step.
Yeah.
Joyfully do it next.
Yeah. It's not joyful, but I'm like, no, I mean, I've dealt with worse. Like in my brain, I'm like, I've dealt with worse than this. I can deal with this.
That's because your capacity for rest and health and experience is also increased. That's something else we forget is like before we may have had a capacity for suffering and pain and trial, but now after you go through the challenges and you take advantage of the restoration, your capacity for it goes up. So going back to what you said, sometimes there's these puzzles of your life that you could not solve. Well, a future version of you gets experience and capacity and self-trust and self-confidence. You can go back to those rooms, go back to those parts of your life and revisit them and realize, oh, I now can see the answer so clearly. Just turn that button, push this here. And sometimes it's just realizing you don't have the fear anymore.
And as you're talking, I was thinking there are certain games I've played where you don't level up until you acknowledge the level up. Like it lets you know that the XP is available, but you have to go into a certain field or window and you have to hit yes on the button. And then you get all the reward and the XP and all of that. And I think in some ways, and this is me going on about how important introverted sensing and memory is. But I oftentimes say, and I'm sure the listener has heard me saying this on the podcast, is that self-confidence, the algorithm for self-confidence is overcoming obstacles and then taking an accounting of it. And so part of leveling up, in my opinion, is the taking accounting of it. That's like going into the special window and acknowledging that you leveled up. And so I think most of us, everybody has challenges in their life. That's life, right? And we go through these really difficult times and we get to the other side and we feel like we barely made it. But the thing we don't do is stop and take an accounting of it. We don't take a minute to process what we've just experienced. We don't do the introverted sensing or memory work of processing what that meant, who we were at the beginning of it versus who we are now, all the things that changed, all that life threw at us and everything that we've overcome. And so we don't get the reward of that XP, right? We just, it's almost like it's sitting there banked, waiting for us to go in and acknowledge it. And as soon as we do, then we get the level up. Then we get the skills that come along with it and the health and mana and whatever bars fill up. But until we take an accounting of it, we just won't get that reward. And so I think what you're talking about, that fifth room, that room of restoration, a part of it is a room of processing, it sounds like too. It's like we have to process what we just experienced. We have to process what we've gone through and recognize how it impacted us. And then once we take an accounting of it, we can gain the self-confidence that comes with going, oh, I did that. I was able to get to the other side of it. So now I can probably I feel more ready for whatever life has to throw at me.
That's why ceremonies and rituals and holidays, any marker of time is so important, because you can get to that point this year and say, oh, this is not where I was last year. I have made progress. I have graduated. I think in some ways that's why there can be such joy and simultaneously sadness around holidays.
Right.
And I look at myself, I'm thinking, okay, I'm ENFJ. I don't even have introverted sensing in my top 4 functions. They're in my shadow functions. And a lot of the work I did in Personality Life Path was tons of introverted sensing work. And the symptom that I had, that I knew, the reason I needed to do introverted sensing work, the symptom was I would get really sad around holidays. And I'm putting this together and thinking, I'm not processing introverted sensing stuff. I'm not taking an account of my graduation, myself, things I've accomplished, the resilience I've developed, the confidence in myself. It was almost backlogged and, like you said, banked there waiting for me. And so introverted sensing has become this almost revelation in my life of like, oh, I need to do ceremonies. I need to do holidays. And I have found that the symptom of fearing the holiday or getting really gloomy around the holiday has gone away. I'm like, I think I've made peace with this finally.
What a great marker for needing to do introverted sensing or memory processing is, are you getting sad around the holidays?
I mean, it was,
So run that through your framework though. Run through the four diagnostics.
Getting sad around the holidays?
Yeah. So you're feeling that and you look at this for the framework of these 4: barrier, puzzle, trap, battle. How do we look at this?
I mean, I think I would just take it through the simple process of like, okay, there is a barrier and like, I don't even know what I'm looking for the reward. I just know there's this giant wall in front of me of like depression or sadness or holiday blues or not wanting to get around family. And the initial barrier would be, am I willing to find out what's really there? Well, I don't know what's behind all this sadness. I mean, is something wrong with me? Is there something, do I need to go see like a specialist? Am I broken? Like it was a very fear. It's almost like an illusion of this like terrifying monster before me saying, you can't get through here. It's scary to go into your introverted sensing. Yeah. So the barrier was initially fear.
Okay. Well, and there's probably 2 levels of this. Initially, if you heard this and you were kind of, okay, I'll try the barrier. Oh, it's just getting through the holiday. I'll put on a smiling face and I'll do all the all the things to get through the holiday. Like I've said, I'll get through X experience. Mm-hmm. That's me not really looking at it as a barrier at the deep level. It's like a surface barrier. I'm just going to get through it.
Yeah.
I just have to get through the holidays. I'll put on a smiley face. I'll just endure. At the end, I'll collapse and I'll get, through this thing. I don't struggle with holidays, but I have my own versions of these things. So that would be like a low level barrier look. But you're saying you go one layer deeper, like, okay, deeper growth opportunity here.
Well, that was the problem. The question was, why is Jonathan sad around holidays?
Yes.
And I didn't know the answer because I'm the hero on the journey. And a lot of times we don't know. That's the point, is we're as much of an audience in our own life because we're in present moment. Like we don't know how this is going to turn out. So a lot of the stuff that comes up for us, like, why do I feel bad about this? Why am I always getting into this fight? Why can't I seem to get ahead in life? Why can't I get my finances done? It's probably because you don't have the answer.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense, but like, well, you don't have the answer. You have to process through this.
Yeah.
And a lot of times there's a very big barrier in the way that's saying, I'm sorry, but the price of admission is uncertainty. It's going to be, you're going to have to face a fear. And my personal one was like, I'm scared of what I'm going to find. Like, what if I hate Christmas? I don't know. Like,
well, and I think in a situation like you're talking about, Joel, pinning on a smile and just waiting for the wave to pass, I don't think it's actually getting through a barrier, right? It's like just getting through the initial, the worst tension of the barrier or the pressure of the barrier. But if it's going to meet you the next holiday, then you didn't actually get through anything.
I think of like those old stories where like there's this one moon cycle, a full moon that happens at a specific time of year, and the townspeople always get really scared because a monster comes out of the woods and takes one of the children. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it just keeps happening again and again and again. And the barrier would be like, okay, I'm going to go find out. What is this monster that's hiding? And our problems are a lot like that. Mm-hmm. We keep having the same problems over and over again. And in some ways, we can thank holidays for showing them to us because they're cyclical. They're showing us like this keeps coming around every holiday. We experience this exact same problem. There's a monster that's in your shadow that's hiding, and it keeps taking something away from you. And it's just almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yep.
The barrier is really like, you know what? I don't care what I find. I'm tired of this thing eating me alive, this problem bothering me. I'm tired of not being at peace with myself. The barrier is I'm going to push past the fear, and I don't care what's on the other side of myself.
Right.
I will find it.
Yeah.
And that really starts the process. And that's the real the question of the barrier. Why has no one done this before?
Right.
Why hasn't Jonathan solved his problem of getting moody around the holidays and making life miserable for his family?
Yeah.
Why hasn't he done that? Well, because he's scared. That's why he's scared of what he's going to find in himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So then I kind of see fear as the indicator that I'm in the barrier realm. I don't know if I'm going to feel fear when I'm at a puzzle.
Yeah.
Or if I'm in a trap, I'm going to feel more grief and loss. But fear seems to be the barrier emotion.
I think there's many emotions with it. I think the barrier oftentimes is what lets you know you've begun the journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say confusion might be a puzzle indicator. Like if I feel confused.
Okay, true. Yeah.
If I'm confused and I need connection, I need to make sense of something. I feel like maybe I'm in a puzzle. I'm trying to use emotions to try to know if somebody's listening or watching right now. Yeah. How do they know what they're facing? Where do they know where they are on this little 4-part journey?
I would say safely, yeah, fear is a good one because you have to cross over the moat. You have to go into the forest. You have to knock on the door. And I like the emotion of confusion because a puzzle is usually something you've never seen before.
Yeah.
It's mismatched. And it's something within inside us that we like. I mean, that's the very, like going inside or like I go to this introverted sensing part of myself and realize I don't even recognize this part of myself. Mm. It's going to take a little bit of creativity in order to solve this and make peace with it. Yeah. So I started a garden.
There you go. Well, and then I think grief might be associated with like the
trap.
The trap. You have to let go and grieve. Mm-hmm. And maybe courage and strength is what is needed for the battle. Like if you are, I guess fear maybe on both the barrier and the battle in a way.
And I feel like barriers also bring out frustration in me.
Yeah. Banging your head against a wall. Yeah.
Barriers are very, I guess I have fear around, that's probably the underneath emotion that makes me pause before just going directly up and around and over. But I find like for me, whenever I have a barrier, I'm just so irritated and frustrated.
Yeah. And I think anger actually is on also the conflict as well, which is a lot of times where we don't face conflict.
Yes.
I remember talking to this camp kid. I was working in the clinic and this kid came in. He was sad. He's crying, homesick, had a splinter. And I finally got him to, do a little therapeutic yelling.
Mm-hmm.
We were in like plenty of acres. He could scream and he actually felt better. And I realized a lot of times we give permission for people to grieve. We give permission for people to cry. We don't give a lot of permission for people to yell.
No, or be angry. Oh, yeah. In fact, a lot of times people think that anger is like just
wrong emotion.
Like an evil, like a bad emotion, or it's wrong, or aggressive,
sinful.
Or you're doing something to somebody else. And so it's like, what do we do with all this pent up rage and anger that we're experiencing every day?
I would speculate then a lot of boss battles in our life, a lot of, zero sum games are not being solved because a lot of times it requires that just willpower of like, no, I'm asserting myself into this part of my life and saying no. Kind of going back to that movie Whiplash, like there's this point where he says, like, he pushes the director and conductor aside and says, no, I'm running this now. This is my job. This is my part.
Well, and anger is usually associated, I don't know 100%, but I think it's often associated with a boundary cross. And we almost always
territorial.
Exactly. The conflict, the big boss happens because it's crossing a boundary, right? Even if that boundary is your desire, it's like crossing into your territory.
Absolutely.
And so the anger needed to stand up for yourself and right or wrong, or, face injustice.
Going back to myself, like what I found in the dungeon is like, I am not managing my emotions. I'm not taking charge. I'm just like letting them slowly leak out like a low gas leak. And they start probably like 3 days before the holiday, peak at the holiday and leak out. And it's like, this is really inefficient. And I did bring up anger within myself that I had wasted and lost so much. And I felt like I faced a part of myself. And the only thing that kept me through was like, no, I want something on the other end. I finally found what I want. I want to be able to celebrate a holiday. I want to make peace with celebrating a holiday and have that ritual in my life and say, another year has gone by.
Yeah.
And I was willing to be angry at myself and like put that part of myself to rest. That was this terrible monster that was like siphoning off energy and, being kind of a party pooper at all these get-togethers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Well, it also gives me compassion just for other people. Before, I know you're probably going to pivot to something else here. If your ENFJ preferences.
Yeah.
You're admitting to me that you're grumpy and kind of don't really like holidays. And I'm going, this is what you're supposed to do for a living. Like do holidays. I'm being stereotypical and tropey.
This is what you do.
Yeah.
You make people happy.
But that's okay. First of all, I'm pointing to where stereotypes come in. Even for me, I've been doing this for over a decade. Even me, I'm like, wait, you have extroverted feeling, harmony as your driver, and holidays is your Super Bowl, Jonathan. That's like when that's when all the cooking happens and the service and all the things that you love and the gathering of people
it's
and
like
all
not
the
for NFJs.
all the fun and all that. In my mind, that stupid stereotype part of my mind.
Yeah,
clearly that's not how it works. But that's like, I go there and like, oh wait, you struggle with holidays of all the things that should be. You'd think that would be the most joyful time because the people you care about the most are gathered and everybody's connected. Everything's been turned off the outer world.
Right.
And you're just spending time with each other. There's nothing pulling on you. Everyone's at home together. And here you can't even enjoy that part, which from my perspective would be very rewarding for a harmony user, extroverted feeling driver.
Yeah. I think that's the symptom is realizing there's something wrong with me. I'm
not saying that.
But that's the thing is like, I
have your preferences, whatever.
I mean, there is a beauty in saying I should be better at this by now. I should be and I think like sometimes we push away that voice because we think it sounds critical, but really it's a quest giver.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of times a critical voice can be a quest giver. Like you should be doing better at this by now. Why isn't this handled in your life?
Yeah.
We tend to push away that voice. And I think sometimes we skip out on a lot of adventurous quests within our own psyche, calling upon parts of a self that we are unfamiliar using. And the gift of using all that was like, I became very well acquainted with myself, realized I love holidays. Actually, I like inventing holidays. I mean,
Noam Chomsky Day.
Another movie reference.
Another movie we just recently watched. It's called Captain Fantastic. It's a wonderful. It's not a superhero movie. Any family that's offbeat and quirky and countercultural needs to see that movie. And it's actually a really good movie about fathers.
Yes.
And we have so few movies about fathers. Like the experience of being a father and some of the, and so it's a beautiful movie.
Yeah, one of a kind. Very indie movie, I think.
Yes,
as well.
It's an indie movie. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway. I think
Noam Chomsky Day.
Noam Chomsky Day was a day.
I discovered a ton about myself. I'm so wise and ascended.
So
learn from me.
So do you have some more things to say about these things?
Well,
where do you want to go? I'll let you direct it.
I was going to say there's got to be some things that emerged when we talked about this model in the last podcast. My suspicion is that, and we kept saying it was like Jonathan would be saying more things right now and he would be giving a little bit more detail. But what were things that emerged that we had missed or maybe some color? Yeah.
I think another thing is, I mean, life is dynamic and it does not follow a series of these problems. You might be encountering in your life 3 barriers in a row, just one after the other, of beating your head against the wall and having to pay a ton of resource in order to get through something. Mm-hmm. You might be encountering no traps at all and discover that there's a betrayal in your party. I mean, that's a whole nother series of traps is when someone betrays you. I mean, do you lose the relationship or do you lose yourself? I mean, that's a no-win situation right there when you're dealing with people and betrayal. But that might not happen that often. So keep in mind that these story beats in our life don't always follow a specific pattern. There's an emergence about it. And the important thing to think is like, okay, diagnose the problem and then see what part of yourself you can call. And a lot of times, like if I don't know, like if I'm not thinking like, oh, I'm being very creative, I'm not really solving this problem in creative ways, I might mimic someone that I do see as a creative person, or I might watch a movie in which someone's solving problems like MacGyver, for example. I like watching that show because I'm just watching them solve things creatively and not get hung up on the outcome, but just enjoying the process of discovery. And I think, okay, if I could just translate that energy into my own problem in life, I might be able to get somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really 50% of our audience go, MacGyver who?
Oh,
what? Like, we're all talking
I know what MacGyver is.
I know, but I just realized like a lot of people are like, what are you talking about, guys? MacGyver.
Well, we live in a Google or AI world, so you can go look for MacGyver right now. And
I know.
But after you listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
Just go to Google and find it.
A lot of movie references. But I mean, like I'm trying to like purposely reference
I'm totally
movies.
kidding.
Yeah.
Please reference what you want. I was just realizing.
I was afraid
realizing how MacGyver's a long time
ago.
I'm
proud I referenced because I thought I was just going to reference Lord of the Rings the whole time. So I know movies. No, I don't actually.
All right. So then I'll kind of do a wrap up on what I've called from this conversation. That there's these different challenges that we run into, and we need to diagnose those different challenges. Like, what am I actually dealing with here? And if I'm dealing with something that needs a more assertive part of me, what's that character inside of me? What's an archetype that I can pull on to meet that challenge where it's at? And then, kind of watch for patterns of the challenges that maybe I find myself in over and over again, maybe because I'm avoiding actually solving it. Or maybe I just turn everything into that. That's one of the things we mentioned last time is I tend to turn things into puzzles and traps, even if they're not. And that's why they're persistent, because I'm not actually solving them where they're at. They need a more assertive energy from me.
Yeah.
So what are the patterns of the challenges you're running into? And is it because you're turning them into that because that's your wheelhouse? And then find those parts of who you are to meet them where they're at. And if you don't have that element, maybe that's actually the skill you need to build. There's a lot of people who really struggle with boundary setting.
Yeah.
Boundary setting feels to me like it doesn't feel like a receptive energy challenge.
No.
It feels very much like an assertive energy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's creating a barrier, actually, maybe for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Or finally putting your foot down and resolving a conflict.
That's right. Exactly. And the other person, I mean, barriers actually, what is it? Fences make good neighbors.
Yeah.
So a good win-win can be created with creating a boundary, but sometimes people don't like it. Right. Yeah. And so for them, like you're actually, they're putting you in a zero-sum game. So that boundary means that a loss has to be taken, but you still need to do it. So what what's the challenge? Why are you having challenges, say, setting up boundaries? Or why do you have challenges with whatever it is that you know you need to be doing, but you're really struggling with? And how can you meet it where it's at? And then don't forget that fifth room.
Yeah.
The fifth room of rest, relaxation,
Absolutely.
treasure, right?
Yeah.
Reward.
The collateral beauty.
What a nice phrase.
Yeah. It's always a beautiful thing. Like in the aftermath of any destruction, or there's always something to be found that's beautiful that you can take away from any incident, any tragedy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and then you even mentioned that the conversation that happens in the elevator.
Yeah.
It's like, it can just be a moment of
humanity. Like the two soldiers, brothers in arms in the trenches.
Yeah.
Like sharing a moment of just humanity amidst, we need that.
Yeah.
And are you making sure that you're taking an accounting of the experiences you've had as you're showing yourself up to solve this particular challenge? Are you taking a minute to look back at all the challenges you've already overcome in order to gain the self-confidence and shore up your reserves to be able to enter whatever's the next phase or this next challenge that you're facing?
Yeah. So we're doing a little bit of an experiment here at Personality Hacker, and Jonathan, you're kind of leading the charge on this. So at the time of this recording, we're doing a test where if someone invests in one of our owner's manuals for personality, one of the 16 owner's manuals, they can book a call currently with you and some of our other people too. We're just building this out, testing it. If it works, we're going to keep it going. It's a little high touch, but the idea is that we can help people in real time on like a 20-minute call contextualize the owner's manual for their type to help identify some of these things.
Yeah.
So whatever your type preferences are, you get your owner's manual, you have your car model of cognition. It shows you your driver, co-pilot, 10-year-old, 3-year-old. Talks about you getting into flow state, talks about solving, trauma looping, how to stop the grip where you get kind of dysthymic and it drains your energy, how to maintain your energy, like all these things we talk about. And we also talk about how to basically design your ideal day for your personality type to make your life ergonomic. So you're getting real calls with people when they get these owner's manuals right now. The volume is as such that we can do this. Now, I don't know if we can do it forever, but so the time this recording is happening. If someone gets an owner's manual, they get the opportunity to get on a call with you or one of the people you're working with on the team here, the discovery team, talking about, okay, what are you facing? And I haven't been on these calls with you and what people are talking about, but they're bringing some of their challenges to the table sometimes, right? When they look at the owner's manual, like, okay, I'm, ESTJ, Jonathan, and here's kind of what I'm facing in life. You'll help triangulate some of the challenge you're facing with the actual owner's manual for the solving of that challenge.
Absolutely.
So we're working on that right now because we're trying to help people diagnose what's going on for them more and more because we believe personality types and understanding our cognition, how we learn information, how we make decisions is the best way to solve those problems. And like you said, this is the key. The reason why personality type and knowing your car model for your personality type and getting your owner's manual is so important is because the problems keep changing.
Yeah.
And you have to update the diagnostics almost in real time. Every day, you're like, okay, even if it's the same problem, you're different.
Yeah.
The players are different. Life is different. So it's a little different than it was yesterday. And so you need you right now listening or watching, you need some diagnostic framework that you can use over and over again that's dynamic, that will update in real time. And I think type provides that.
Yeah, it's flexible enough, it's fluid enough to apply to just a changing lifestyle.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why we love it so much.
Right. That's why it works. So it keeps working. Like with the holiday example, like why doesn't this ENFJ appreciate this holiday and everything? Because life is very dynamic, keeps changing.
Yeah. So I would encourage you, if you're listening or watching right now, I mean, hopefully you're listening at a time when we still have these calls available. No, I hope we can scale this because the goal is we have a lot of people getting owner's manuals enough to where, it's a lot of people are impacted by this. So I can't always promise, but right now, if you're close to the time of this recording and you get an owner's manual for your type, there's an opportunity to book a free call with Jonathan to talk through some of these ideas. Now, it's not a coaching call. We don't have a ton of time to solve all the problems in your life, but we at least give you some direction to use that owner's manual.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go further, you could talk about life path, personal life path or something like that, where that's a much deeper dive for somebody.
Yeah. I think the owner's manuals are like the point at which someone says, well, I was thinking about the whole to like wrap this up, with story beats and life as a movie, life as a dungeon, owner's manual. It's really about like when you decide you're done being a viewer, an audience member in your own life, you put your hands on the wheel and you become a player. And you're actually going through this together and you're learning about yourself. You're processing a ton of stuff in your life. You're finally figuring out the solution to some of your problems. Well, even beyond that is the programmer. And that's when you begin to understand, wait, I can reverse engineer a lot of this.
Yes.
I'm more powerful than I think I am. I'm not just a present player that's just stuck in a situation.
Yeah. I
can navigate through a lot of this and see the design of these problems, of these rests and these restorations, and realize I don't have to be afraid anymore.
Yeah.
So you go from viewer to player to programmer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the information about type that we try to weave into owner's manuals is trying to go to the programmer level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which opens you up for, I think, the deeper aspect of type, because there's things pulling you from the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
There's parts of ourselves that are running the show often, or at least they're sidelining the show. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's really hard to see those, right? They might literally be in our Jungian shadow, like we talk about here on Personality Hacker, or they're just these fuzzy parts. And I think understanding how we're wired as humans really gets clarity to go, okay, now I see how I'm seeing the world. Now I see how I'm making decisions. Like, this is the best way for me to see the world and make decisions. So it gives me clarity. Okay, that's kind of the challenge I'm faced with now. And it gives me some tool sets to address that challenge, which I think is powerful.
Yeah. And that's like learning about type is like where I felt like I was a player.
Yeah.
I realized, okay, I'm just driving this, trying to figure this out one day at a time and trying to figure this new framework out and stop watching my life pass by, but actually taking ownership of it.
Yes.
But then further on, you keep practicing that over and over again. You realize, wait a second, there's a whole design beyond this, and I can change things in my life through reprogramming.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's another way. When we're talking about owner's manual, we're like, another way of seeing it is that, are you ready to own your whole self?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so it's not just an owner's manual for your personality type. It's like, it's helping you own all the parts of yourself.
Yeah. Even the scary part of myself, like, what am I going to find when I start asking myself, why do I fear holidays?
Right.
What's inside me?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So your job watching or listening right now is go get an owner's manual for your personality type. You're going to see the car model in there. So it's going to, showcase basically your cognition, how you learn information, make decisions, but it's also going to show you a little bit more challenging parts, right? The parts you're more uncertain about. Mm-hmm. And we have some strategies to mitigate those, work with them. How to, design your ideal day. You'll get right now, the time of this recording, you'd get a call with Jonathan. I think it's a fantastic value to all of it to really connect this to your real life. We don't want just personality type to be an exercise in theory or just, that's kind of a cool concept. We have seen it change our lives. The three of us have applied it, not just us, but the people in our family, like our immediate families, our children. We've been impacted by the understanding we've created through this. And then obviously the clients we work with and the students that we've worked with, hundreds and hundreds over a decade, coaching and guiding people to use this in their lives, either identify it in somebody else or to learn the source code and be the programmer of your own life. So go get an owner's manual for your type. It's the first place to start. Yeah. It's a great place to start. I think it's going to be a great growth avenue for you. Go do that. And then also come over to the Personality Hacker website and leave some feedback under this episode. We'd love to hear what's coming up for you as you're thinking about your personality, diagnosing the challenges in your life. There's three of us here. There's three microphones. You're the fourth person in this conversation. You don't have a microphone, but we do want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
Yeah, and thank you, Jonathan, for coming out.
Coming out.
In the first one, we were like, we got to get Jonathan on here to tell us what we're actually talking about. So thank you very much for flaying it out a little bit more, giving us a little bit more nuance around it, and then adding that fifth room.
Yeah.
The optimistic endpoint.
We need rest.
That's right. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. It's not, Apple Podcast now, right? If you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, the review is the important thing.
Yes.
It helps us out a lot. That's right. I get some feedback. My little extrovert feeling, harmony, eternal child energy goes, oh, okay, people are listening. This is a thing. So if you would leave a review, that would be really awesome. You might be watching us on YouTube right now, which is why we talked about the differential of where we're sitting.
I'll sit up taller.
You're doing great.
That's right. You look very statuesque over there, I suspect.
Fantastic.
But that's why we talked about it, because you could be watching us right now on YouTube. And if that's the case, you can subscribe, hit the bell so that you're notified of future episodes, and you can leave a comment right underneath this podcast. And as we've mentioned multiple times, you should get yourself a copy of your personality type owner's manual. And as Joel mentioned, for the time being, let's hope that it continues on into the future, but we've set up these calls that you can do with either Jonathan or somebody else on our discovery team to talk a little bit about how to apply the owner's manual to your life. So it's not just theoretical, it's not just conceptual, but you're actually operating type in your life in order to make it better, to make it ergonomic for who you are.
All right. Well, thanks for being a co-host this week, Jonathan.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Antonia.
So we'll do this in order 1, 2, 3. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
I'm Jonathan Hardin.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.